Okay. Hi, Lisa. How are you?
Good. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Well, thank you for coming on. Nice to see you. As we were talking about before we got on, we had a couple of cancellations and you were suffering from laryngitis. Did you get that from doing too many interviews?
And flying every day. Book tour is a little rough physically,
Oh,
and then
yeah.
you're talking all night long. And yeah, day three of book tour, I lost my voice. It was not great. I was very squeaky.
Well, the flying too, because the dry air on the
Yeah.
airplanes, and yeah, that's not so good. Well, I'm glad you're feeling
Readers
better.
were amazing. Everyone just kept bringing me throat lozenges. I'd sign books and end up with these piles of throat lozenges. It was really fun.
Well, I'm curious because how much talking do you have to do on a book tour?
Well, I mean, the events themselves are a couple hours each night, and getting to have that interface with readers, really, especially after COVID, has been amazing. And then you're doing a lot of media during the day. So, yeah, you go from being an introvert that's been staring at, shut up, staring at a blank computer screen to all of a sudden the life of the party. We're not really cut out for it, to be honest.
So this is different than a book signing. I guess I'm getting those two confused, where you would just
Yeah.
sit there at a bookstore and sign. This is actually you're getting up and doing a presentation of some sort.
Yeah, it's a whole dog and pony show.
Oh,
I got to
okay.
meet with a lot of great other authors on it too, talking about process and how we write and talking about kind of the making of the new book, the research and stuff that goes into it. When people come out now, you want to entertain them, you want to give them a great time.
So is this something that's put on by your PR people, or is this something that I mean, how does this work? Because I've never been to one.
So my publicist for Grand Central, my publisher will put it together, but it's really something also for the local independent bookstores. So it gives them an opportunity, to bring crowds in, to have some great business. So you're going from like bookstore to bookstore around the country in major markets.
Oh, so it is at a bookstore, but it's more than just sitting there signing books for people lined up.
Yeah.
Okay, I get it. Okay. Well, I'm glad you're here, and we're going to be talking about the one that's behind you there. Still see you
Yep.
everywhere. Now, I see two different covers. Is this, why are there
It
two different
is.
covers for the same book?
The purple one is US and that is British.
Oh, okay. Well, what's the difference other than the
The
cover?
cover.
That's it.
Just that. Exactly.
Okay, so there's no different in the content, right?
The content's the same, but they're different markets. So, cover's part of marketing. So they're each doing the cover they think it works best for their market.
Is this book a series or is this a standalone?
So Still See You Everywhere is book three for Frankie Elkin. She is a recovering alcoholic who specializes in working missing persons cold cases. She does it all on her own. She's not an investigator. She has no special training. She kind of got into it to help a friend, and ever since, for her, she feels it's her way of staying sober. She keeps herself busy. She's going from town to town working these cases. Is she moving towards something? Is she running away from something? I don't think she knows the answer to that just yet.
Is she like Nancy Drew?
Kind of, yeah. That's a good analogy because I grew up reading Nancy Drew, of course. She's actually indicative of real world events we're seeing now, where because of the internet and more access to information, you're getting more everyday people involved in particularly cold cases. Because if the forensics were going to solve it, it would have happened. If the detectives had the answers, that would have solved it. So really, you're getting back to just old gumshoe investigative work of going forth and talking to people, and often not being a member of law enforcement and having some years pass, you're more likely to stumble upon the correct information to finally break open the case.
Where does she find these cases? I mean, is she actively hunting for these on the internet or how do they come to her?
There are messaging boards and things like that, but Still See You Everywhere is a novelty situation even for Frankie. She's actually contacted by a lawyer to come to death row to meet with her client who will be executed in 3 weeks' time. And she just got a letter from what she believes was her baby sister who was kidnapped 15 years ago. So the beautiful butcher, her kind of dying wish is that Frankie might go and be able to rescue her sister so that she would know at least her sister is safe.
Does Frankie have a sordid past, or do we know that?
Um, she's she is a definitely a recovering alcoholic, and she drank a lot. She lived a pretty marginalized, on the fringes life. Has been to jail, has made a lot of not great life decisions, and then she got sober 10 years ago. But it's still a very real struggle for her. And one of the things that seems to work for her is to immerse herself into other people's problems. It's always so easier to solve than her own.
Well, so by immersing herself in other people's problems, is she working through her own problems in a sort of roundabout way?
I think the fun thing writing Frankie for me is she doesn't know yet. Why does she do it? It's kind of one of the central questions driving the books and her. What kind of person walks away from everything? I mean, she doesn't have a fixed address, a stable job, a, a solid relationship. She goes from case to case across the country on Greyhound buses because she also doesn't have a lot of money. So it's a very different kind of life, but it is working for her. So she just keeps doing it.
Did I just jump to book 8 with that question? Is that,
No.
are we going to find out later? Yeah.
I don't plan ahead. I don't. So part of the writing process for me is discovery. And each book, I discover a little bit more about Frankie, and so does the reader.
So each book is a different case, it's a new case.
Yeah.
So you don't have to start with book 1 necessarily.
No, I think it's important that each book can stand on its own. I'm a big reader myself, and it's unusual to discover a series right at the beginning. More often or not, you pick out a book because it sounds great, and you realize, oh, it's book 7. So you need to know that you can read that. And then if you love it, you can go back and wow, now there's a lot more books to read, which is always, I think, fun.
Well, I see a lot of books up there with your name on them. How many do you have published at this point?
Okay, my publisher had to count this for me because I don't. I believe our official total is 28.
28. Okay, so when did you start writing, uh, publishing, maybe a better way to put it?
30 years ago, honest to God, I actually wrote my first book at 17 and sold it at 20.
Didn't have any rejections at all? You got it right out of the gate?
I was lucky in that now you're talking the early 90s, and that it took 2 years before an editor bought the manuscript. And then I got a 20-page single space revision letter. So I'm not sure there's any word of the original book that actually made it through to the finish. But back then, you had editors, publishers who were much more willing to work with authors and help bring them along. That's something that's difficult to find now.
How do you feel about self-publishing? I mean,
You
if you
know,
were starting out now, is that a route that you would go?
you have to ask yourself what you want and what works for you as an author. I have friends who self-publish and love it. One of the trade-offs you're making, though, you're getting more editorial control, but you also have a lot more of the promotion and marketing. Um, you know, to help people discover and become aware of that book. That's my weakness. I would much rather just sit in a room and write news stories. The marketing part's not my favorite.
I think that self-publishing is beginning to gain credence with people because I know when it first came out, people were like, "Oh, if it's self-published, it's no good," because it didn't go through the gatekeepers, and that's not necessarily true.
I think it's been really exciting now, all the different ways of publishing. It's becoming more grassroots. There's a lot more opportunities out there. I think that's great for writers. I think that's great for readers. It means there's a lot more for you to discover as well. So, I mean, in the past 30 years, that's one of the biggest changes I've seen in the industry, and I think it's very exciting.
Are all the books that you write mysteries? Are they all different? Or tell us a little about your whole sort of body of work.
I love suspense. I've always been fascinated by puzzles. I love, everything from the whodunit, but to also the action-packed thriller. And I'm fascinated by criminology. So even something like The Beautiful Butcher, our female serial killer, and Still See You Everywhere, why a female serial killer? How are they different from men? What would drive a woman to do this when we generally see more male serial killers? I find all of that fascinating. So yes, I've always done suspense. And then, when I first started, it was serial killers all the time. FBI profilers was big. Then I did a detective for a while, which was also a lot of fun. And I got to do different kinds of crime then. And now I have, kind of basically called an amateur sleuth. And she doesn't have any investigative resources. So how does she go about getting the answers? I like the different challenges.
Well, so now that you have an established character and kind of an MO for what she's supposed to do, where do you pick your cases, or how do you decide what you're going to have her do and investigate?
Generally from the news, to be honest. So in this particular case of Still See You Everywhere, the young girl in question was kidnapped from Hawaii at the age of 5. And there's a huge issue right now with human trafficking in Hawaii. And just to make it even more complicated, no one is tracking it statistically. And in terms of the Department of Justice, Native Hawaiians are classified separately than Native Americans on kind of North American soil. And that's made it difficult to get a full picture of what's going on, other than this growing recognition that young women in particular are disappearing at very high numbers. And we don't have a good bead on how to help, how to find them, and how to make it stop.
Interesting. So Still See You Everywhere, this has been released, I assume, right?
Yes, it's available wherever books are sold, also in audio.
Okay, when was it released?
I should know my own publishing date. A couple weeks ago.
Okay, so
When did I lose my voice? Right about then.
right about then, okay, because that was a couple weeks ago that you were supposed to be here and we didn't make it. Yeah. Okay, and you said this is book 3 in the series?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what about book 4? You can give us a teaser?
Yeah, so one of my passions is traveling. So Still See You Everywhere also came because I had an opportunity to go to this really remote atoll in the Pacific that became the basis for this. And while I was there, I also met a couple who volunteered to help settle Afghan refugees in Tucson. And there again is an issue fraught with a lot of real world hazards, risks, complications. And so so far I'm laughing. Book 4 is Frankie Goes to Tucson.
Oh, I thought you were going to say Frankie Goes to Afghanistan.
No, this is resettling them in the United States. And the refugee problem, again, in general in the world is huge and sad. It's 1% of the world's refugees will finally get placement. So I like topical cases, and then I think one of the advantages of fiction, of getting to write a thriller, is you can get closure and you can provide some answers. And I think, in the real world, that's hard to come by. So it's one of the appeals of being able to read a great book at night.
Well, I think on that, we're going to wind it down. Thank you so much for coming on. The book is called Still See You Everywhere. Last question, do you have a website that you want to give out?
Yes. You're welcome to find me at lisagardner.com. And today, April 1st, is exciting because it's the official relaunch of the Kill a Friend, Maim a Buddy sweepstakes, where you can nominate the person of your choice to die in my next book.
Oh, I've got a few.
Yeah. I consider it my community service. Everyone has people they would.
Most of mine are radio station owners, but that's a show for a different day. Lisa, thanks so much for coming on. It was a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you so much.